Video games are unique as a storytelling medium, and the thing that makes them unique is their relationship to their audience. Aside from a few specific theater experiences or the odd choose-your-own-adventure book or video series here and there, video games are the only medium where the audience can directly interact with the work and the story can directly interact with the audience. In my experience, the best characters and storytelling moments in video games come from the devs using the gameplay itself to let the story happen directly to you, the player, through the character you play as. Altogether, too many games are content to just slap a cutscene on everything in an attempt to be cinematic when this is, in fact, not cinema. And it's missing out on the medium's greatest strength when it tries too hard to be cinema. So, at a certain point, why not just make a movie instead, you know? There's a reason games like The Last of Us translate so well to screen, while other adaptations can feel more shallow or like they're lacking something when you remove gameplay from the story. And in my opinion, few characters better exemplify how video games can be uniquely effective in their storytelling than Curly Brace from Cave Story. If you aren't familiar with Cave Story, it's an indie game from 2004 that was pretty much the first major indie game to get popular via the internet. Sure, prior to that, there were more underground pockets with stuff like Toho in the 90s, and indies didn't hit the mainstream until the 2010s, but Cave Story dominated and inspired the early 2000s indie scene in the way Minecraft would later dominate the early 2010s, and other stuff would come later and the cycle would continue. And the way the game's creator took the very mechanics and rules of the game and then wrote Curly Brace around those rules in both the dialogue and the actions she takes without removing the player from the gameplay is what gives her such an effective impact on the player and the story even when she's not immediately on screen. I know other people have talked about this, but it's usually within the context of a wider Cave Story analysis. But I wanted to take some time to do a specific character study on Curly Brace, how the game's creator, Daisuke Amaya, expressed her character and the relationship to the player through gameplay, and why that makes Curly Brace best girl. Although, for maximum potency, her effect on the story is best experienced blind. If you haven't played Cave Story before, it's still available in its original form from 2004, completely for free, and later enhanced versions published by Nicalis are relatively inexpensive on modern storefronts. So, you have no excuse. Unless you're just very not into Tough as Nails old school 2D action platforming Metroidvania lights, which, you know what, that's fair. Lord knows I have my fair share of all-time classics I have less than zero intention of ever playing based on the genre alone, so while I do highly recommend you give it a shot, not everything is going to be for everybody, and that's okay. Spoiler alert aside, let's dive into this. And where better to start than at the beginning? First impressions are huge. Oftentimes, the first thing a character does or says is the biggest thing that sticks with you. That first encounter is one of the biggest things you need to nail to set the mood, so how does Curly Brace make her first impression? Well, before that, we need to talk about the context in which she makes that first impression. Okay, so start game, wake up in cave, get gun, shoot bats. Who are you? Don't know. What you do know is bad guys are hurting bunnies. Shoot bad guys, save bunnies. Learn about an evil doctor trying to turn bunnies into monster war machines. Go to grasslands to save the brother of this bunny who used to be a human. Also end up saving this Professor Booster guy, and only now do we finally get any information on our protagonist. This little dude that you play as is a robot. More than that, he's a robotic soldier, one of many who was sent to the floating island that this game takes place on several years prior to the events of the game. The purpose of this attack was an attempt to claim the evil power that the Doctor is currently using at any cost, destroying anything that got in their way, including the aforementioned bunny people called Mimiga. Obviously, this particular killer robot was unsuccessful in his task, and something happened that caused him to shut down and reboot a decade later with a heavy case of silent protagonitis. Symptoms of silent protagonitis may include, but aren't limited to, partial or total loss of vocal function, partial or total amnesia, a willingness to go along with whatever the first people you meet tell you to do because the plot has to happen somehow, and level regression including a resetting of max HP, resetting of max ammo, and total loss of special skills. If you or a loved one has been affected by silent protagonitis, you may be eligible for financial compensation. And by financial compensation, I mean anything in your neighbor's houses that isn't bolted down that may be helpful in your quest to destroy evil. This message was brought to you by the Video Game Centers for Health and Wellness, Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. So anyway, after learning about this, Professor Booster says you need to go to Sand Zone, and you kind of go along with it because the plot has to happen somehow. So you get to Sand Zone, and hold up, that's another robot. Hey, where are you going? You only get a small glimpse, but it's clearly another robot soldier. She looks like you between the pale skin, the green ear antennae, the red clothes, and generally small build and cute childlike face. Hold on, what kind of creepy weirdo creates an elite team of robot soldiers and makes them look like middle schoolers? You invent a bunch of highly advanced and efficient murder machines for your robotic SEAL Team 6, and they look like they're 12. And some government somewhere approved this. It's like the plot of a Spy Kids movie. Tangents aside, seeing this mysterious figure creates immediate intrigue because we only just got the lore on our character and now there's another one? And it's a girl? Maybe she can shed some further light into our predicament. So we climb up the adjoining shaft, find her house, wine glass. Classy. And as we enter, she greets us with a, "Hey, you're a robot like me, meaning you're here to kill the Mimigas and I can't let that happen." And then she pulls a gun on us. From this interaction, we can glean a couple of things. For one, odds are we're not the first robot she's encountered, and the others she has met were hostile. Which makes sense, because back in the grassland, we met a robot who showed signs of hostility toward us until he got his brain caved in by a bar of soap. Then he helped us build a bomb. So for her to assume we have the intentions that our character was programmed with is fair. Perhaps a little rash and trigger happy, but still fair. But we also learn that, like us, she has somehow risen above her base programming and is dedicated to protecting the Mimiga. But she doesn't give us time to process this because it's mini-boss time, baby! At this point in the game, the weapon that you have that can deal the most damage is the missile launcher. And because it has limited ammo, I'm sure I'm not alone in using it sparingly, saving it primarily for boss fights. So when struck with a sudden boss encounter, one may reflexively swap to missiles, and they don't work. She has some kind of bubble shield that she whips out to just invalidate our missiles. Clever girl. This makes her stand out as no other boss before her, and also nobody after her has the ability to just say no to an attack like this, short of having a specific weak spot. So I guess it's just you and your Polar Star against her Mimiga friends, and her machine gun? Hold on, she's got a machine gun? She just got 30% cooler, holy smokes. Or at least, that was my reaction until she killed me because it was my first playthrough and I wasn't good at the game yet and I wasn't expecting a sudden boss fight. So, okay, new info. She's tough. A capable soldier and a match for you when she's got the drop on you. Also just a fun fight. I mean, if you've made it this far into the game, you obviously don't mind a tricky fight here and there, and she's fun. But now that you've got the download on her, she goes down without too much difficulty in your second or maybe third attempt. And so you beat her, and she's like,
"Well, this is the part where he kills us."
And you're all,
"Hello, this is the part where I kill you."
Except not, because you're supposed to say you're on the Mimiga side. And instantly, like flipping a switch, she's excited to meet you. She's all, "So you have amnesia too? Sucks, right? But we gotta protect the Mimiga, they're the good guys. And to that end, hey, that pea shooter of yours looks old and decrepit. Would you like to trade it for my machine gun?" Now, to the experienced player, who knows that the Polar Star can be traded later for something much better, declining is a no-brainer. But to a first-time player, who potentially just got bodied a couple of times by the very gun that she's offering you, that's the easiest decision of your life. Heck yes, I want that machine gun. And the best part is, this gun is every bit as cool as you thought it would be, and infinitely more. Because it turns out, if you can level this machine gun up to max, the recoil on that puppy is so strong that when it's aimed at the ground, the force of the machine gun will propel you upward, meaning this machine gun also doubles as a jetpack. Do you realize how cool that is? Aside from the inherent coolness of a machine gun jetpack as a concept, this is a tough little platformer. And if you can manage to keep it leveled up, this weapon is the perfect little tool to take the edge off some of the upcoming platforming sections. Extending jumps, catching falls, in addition to just its raw damage output, makes this a really satisfying weapon that nicely ties together all the fun of both platforming and combat into one mechanic. And I can't help but associate all this fun with the person who gave me this weapon. Every time I use the machine gun, I'm subconsciously reminded of Curly Brace and how cool she is for letting me have it. It's not just her design, or her bright and chipper personality, or her lore implications, or even her boss fight that makes her cool to me. You could be actively ignoring all the story and mashing through all the dialogue, but Curly Brace will still have a lasting impact on the player through the basic moment-to-moment gameplay should you choose to take her up on her trade offer. And that's just her first impression! The very next time we see her is when we get banished to the labyrinth in the heart of the island. She apparently got sent there too, but now she's sick, so we have to fight an unexplained square shadow demon to get some drugs so the frog doctors can make her feel better. So, overall kind of an uneventful second meeting, but what happens next is more substantial. Later, after beating a giant cat in the tank, we meet up with a recovered Curly Brace. We try to move a rock and a toaster man comes and knocks Curly out. We fight him and he helps us move the rock so the player and Curly can try and make that final push to escape the labyrinth. And it may come as a surprise to your first time players, but Curly Brace actually joins you for this next section of gameplay. And she's a beast! She's a regular killing machine, holy moly! I mean, we already knew that because of her boss fight, but it just hits different when she's on your team, you know? In other games, having an AI-controlled companion accompany you could become a nuisance and get in the way, or even become the dreaded escort mission. But she's just as capable of a fighter as you are. Perhaps even more so. Remember that bubble shield that blocked your missiles earlier? Well, it also seems to be an air supply of sorts, because even though this area has a lot of water hindering your movement and restricting your air, she can just plunge through it without issue. Kinda makes a guy jealous. Wish I could have a bubble shield like that. But the point is, we make a great team. This area isn't particularly difficult, especially compared to the rest of the labyrinth, but maybe because of that, combined with Curly Brace's help and this jammin' music, this is just an exhilarating, triumphant sequence that makes you feel like you're on top of the world. This right here is a sequence of gameplay that is just plain fun, makes you feel just plain cool, and Curly Brace is right there to facilitate it. And then we come to the core. A critical turning point in the game's story and tone, and it's what Curly Brace does here that truly cements her in the hearts of anyone who's played this game. There's a brief door opening sequence that once again reminds you of how much of a hindrance water can be, and we find ourselves in a room full of dead robot soldiers, apparently the last stand of their assault on this island. One robot briefly reboots to freak out, then a boss fight against the island's core begins. And despite being initially blown back, Curly Brace actually stands up and begins fighting alongside you again. It's a tough and treacherous fight with constantly changing water levels to keep you on your toes managing your air, but eventually you weaken the core enough for the bad guys to show up and teleport the core away, leaving you inside of a sealed, flooding room. The room fills with water, you pass out, but you don't die. You wake up, and no reply. On my first playthrough, this reveal, this character death, affected me more than any character's death I had seen in any media prior. This reveal was an emotional roller coaster from front to back, expertly crafted entirely without removing the player from the illusion of gameplay. It starts when the boss chamber fills up with water. By this point in the game, the player knows that water is deadly. It may or may not have killed you at least once earlier. And both this boss fight and the entire level leading up to it have flashed that panic-inducing countdown timer at every opportunity they could. Pair that with the impaired movement, and the sudden unexpected flooding of this boss room is sure to fill any first-time player with confusion and dread. Even if the fear the player feels is entirely the fear of lost progress and needing to redo a boss, at least the fear that they feel in that moment is authentic. Outside of some fringe anime VR cases, a game over is the only real death a player can be afraid of enough to threaten them with. That or a loss of save data if you're feeling really spicy. But if the game hard switches into a cutscene, you've already braced the audience for impact because you've let them know something is going to happen because you removed them from gameplay. And in the middle of a game like this, the player knows with absolute certainty that the main character cannot die because the rest of the game has to happen somehow. Unless this is the final cutscene in a game where the main character's already coughed blood into a white handkerchief multiple times because of tuberculosis, their death is completely off the table as an option. You can't be afraid for your character. But when the screen blacks out here, the despair felt over an apparent game over is as close to an authentic fear for your character's life as you can get from a game. But it's not a game over? Some confusion. And then relief. You somehow survived. And you have a bubble shield now, just like... Oh. And now, the realization. No dialogue. No cutscene highlighting how tragic it is, with over-the-top dramatic music ham-fistedly dictating how you're supposed to feel right now because it's so darn sad. Just a moment of quiet realization as the game allows room for the player to connect the dots on their own. They're not particularly hard dots to connect. It's still very obvious what happened here, but the fact that there isn't a huge fanfare about it, the fact that it just happens, suddenly, without warning, and the fact that you, not the game, not your character, not some disembodied narrator, but you, the player, are the one that spells out the exact details is what makes this tragedy so profoundly poignant. This whole reveal is so much more effective than any cutscene I've ever watched in any game ever because the reveal came from within myself. It's the same as how the most effective horror happens off-screen, and the worst details are only alluded to in a way that lets the audience disgust themselves with the conclusions they're forced to come to. Or how the most effective mystery stories are the ones that give enough room for the audience to put the clues together alongside the detective, and come to that aha moment at the same time. In my experience, the single most satisfying way to engage an audience in your story, no matter the medium, is when you can make the story reveals come from inside the mind of the audience. And that kind of audience engagement is precisely what video games can be so uniquely effective at. Also, this isn't a cutscene death, if you will. You know, when a character has been shown in gameplay to be able to perform all sorts of feats and tank all sorts of hits, but then later dies to something that should have been perfectly survivable based on gameplay logic, just because the story said it's time for them to die because the plot has to happen. Rather, the death that Curly Brace dies is perfectly consistent with the logic the rest of the game follows. To the point that you, as the player, were scared that you were going to die that exact way mere moments ago. There's no question of why didn't they just use a Phoenix Down in this scenario to take the player out of the moment. She also wasn't a total nothing character that was created just to die for some cheap motivation. She could have been the exact same kind of hero the player is given different circumstances. In fact, she does just that if you steal her underwear to unlock the alternate Curly story mode added to later releases of the game. She was every bit as capable and determined as Mr. Traveler here, so the fact that in those last moments, what by all rights should have been your last moments, after everything she's already done for you, the fact that Curly Brace made the choice to put your life above her own and save you, the player, from a real death that you were actually afraid of, it really gives you something to think about. And the game gives you a good long time to think about it in the next area. A low-intensity dive through the living waterway with its melancholic music and the currents that throw you around like you have no control over anything anymore. An area that's almost entirely composed of underwater sections that forces you to use the bubble shield as a constant reminder of what you survived and at what cost. And then follow that up with the Ruined Egg Corridor being a complete tonal shift from when you saw it at the beginning of the game, highlighting just how much you failed and how much everything sucks now. And then the game gives you the choice to give up, to throw it all away. The bad ending, where you choose to fly away from your problems with Kazuma like a coward, wasting the life that Curly Brace sacrificed her own to save, rendering the faith she placed in you as meaningless. After all that's happened, that ending is a legitimate option that you can choose despite how wrong it feels. Or you could choose to ascend the outer wall, go to the plantation, stop the doctor, save the human researchers, and save the Amiga because that's what Curly Brace would have wanted. If only she could be here too, you know, to see it through with you. And she can! If you do a bunch of kind of random and untelegraphed actions, you can grab the tote cable, grab Curly Brace, give her robot CPR, feed her a mushroom, somehow restoring her memory, and when you do that, she remembers that your character's name is Quote, which makes both of your names coding syntax puns, which is just plain fun. And now you've unlocked the secret true ending. Now, the fact that there are so many cryptic and counterintuitive steps you need to take in order to get this ending may be weak design, but the impact of Curly's character would be weakened if you knew she could be saved from the start, so being able to stumble into the true ending first try is not ideal. And the fact that she is so impactful that preventing her fate could be the core driving motivation for a repeat playthrough, even one with such weird and strict conditions that you had to look up online to know in the first place because you had to know if you could save her, that speaks volumes. From there, after the normal final boss, you can descend into kind of just actually hell and destroy the ancient evil that lives at the center of the island. But you're not alone. Curly Brace is there too, and more in sync with you than ever, because she literally has your back as you carry her around like a backpack, mowing down hordes of angel dudes as the island crashes toward the earth to the appropriately titled song Running Hell. In parentheses, Curly's theme. Wait, hold on, wait a sec. This is the theme of Curly Brace? This is the song the game decided is Curly Brace's theme. But it's all dark and intense. How could something like this be the theme of... That part right there. That bright, uplifting chorus in the midst of all that intense darkness. That ray of sunshine in the depths of hell that encourages you to not give up because I believe in you, I've got your back, and this song is too much of a banger to give up. That's why this is Curly Brace's theme. So hopefully I've made my point clear about how video games can be so uniquely effective in their storytelling, and how this unique style of storytelling is what makes Curly Brace best girl. That's it. That's the video. I said the thing. Insert YouTube spiel here. You know how this works. Okay, love you. Bye.